Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our training session this morning. Before we start, can I please just see that we do have sound? If you can hear me, please do click on the raise your hand button for me. Great, there we go. I can see those hands going up. Right. With regards to the slides for today, I'm quickly going to share it in the chat box. There's not a lot of slides, just the ones that we're quickly going to talk about, but we will also be uploading them all to our Akanani platform where you can access the free session as well as the material and the post-assessment. So we will be sending after the session, we will be sending everyone instructions on how to access it on the Akanani platform. If you have already used our Akanani platform previously, you will know exactly how to go onto it and find the session. It is free, so you can just go and add it there to your profile. And then once again, you will be able to access the material in case you lose it, perhaps. And the post-assessment. So for the post-assessment for today's session, to be able to get the certificate for attendance for CPD purposes, if you would like that, you will have to go onto the Akanani platform. Right. Just quickly loading that material for you in the chat box. There we go. It is sending. Great. It is just an hour session. If there's any questions, we will address them at the end. Right, so please, if I can ask just to leave the questions until, well, you can ask the questions throughout the session. I will just answer them at the end to ensure that we don't run over time. If there's people who need to leave, they can. But at the end of the day, the recording will be available. So don't worry, you will be able to go and get it there. So good morning and welcome to our ISQM1 free session. Please note this hour session isn't a detailed training session on ISQM1. It is an introduction as to what is required and then specifically guidance on our manual for those of you who have purchased it or are going to purchase it in future maybe on exactly how to use it to implement your ISQM1 process. Right, I'm Yvonne Rousseau. I'm your presenter for today. I was also part of developing the manual and some of the resources. So yeah, in that process, I myself have read through ISQM1 about 4 times in its entirety and have also referred back to it quite a lot, have done a lot of research. We are also part of the SAICA working group on ISQM1. So if there are any questions from your side, please do ask. I think in terms of knowledge of the standard, I will be able to answer. Right. So without further ado, let's quickly run through a few introductory items of the standard, how the standard works, and then how we practically implement it. That's really what I want to get to today, is the practical implementation itself. Just quickly take note who it is applicable to. It is applicable to all firms that perform engagements under the international standards, not only audit engagements. That includes your independent reviews. It includes your compilations, independent compilations under ISRS 4410. It includes your agreed upon procedures. It includes your other assurance engagements under ISAE 3000. So definitely audit firms will have to apply ISQM1, but then other firms like your SAIPA firms may also need to apply it insofar as they perform these type of engagements. Now, the big thing that I want to start off with today is the why behind ISQM1. In this journey that I have taken this year, I have spoken to quite a lot of people who think that ISQM1, or maybe the ISQC as well, is, extra work, extra admin. We already don't have time as it is for our audit engagements and for the stuff that we do. So the question is, why is this necessary? Where are we going to find time to implement it? Why do I need to do this? And I think we need to take a step back and just understand the intention and the principles behind ISQM1. At the end of the day, our objective as auditors or as accountants in our profession, right? We chose this profession. We decided to go into this profession. We knew when we chose this profession that we have certain responsibilities that we need to discharge. And that responsibility, that objective is to perform our engagements in a proper way to provide proper opinions and proper reports in the public's interest. That is our objective at the end of the day as auditors, as accountants. To be able to do that, we need to make sure that we comply with the standards that has been provided to us. So our firm, our employees, our personnel comply and fulfill their responsibilities in terms of these standards, whether it's the auditing standards, the independent review standards, the compilation standards. This is the job and the profession that we have chosen, yes? And in order to ensure this, we have to put in some type of management system. The same with any other company. Whether I decide to open up a retail company, whether I decide to become a doctor, whether I decide to become a hairdresser, there are certain management items that you have to put in place. If I decide to become a hairdresser, I can't complain about the fact that I need to purchase proper scissors and make sure that the shampoo I wash the people's hair with isn't going to fry their hair. If I become a doctor, I can't complain about certain steps that I need to take to ensure I do my job properly. If I have a retail shop, I can't complain about certain controls that I have to put in place to ensure that the business is run in a profitable and proper way. So the same with our profession. There are certain management items that needs to be put in place to ensure that we perform our duties properly. And that's really where ISQM 1 comes from. But it's how we plan and manage our job, our work, our duties that we perform to ensure that we do it in such a way that it is in the public's interest, that we discharge our duties, that we do it properly. It's like internal control in any other entity. So the point of ISQM 1 is not to put more responsibilities in place. If you look at the principles behind it, if you take it down to its fundamental requirements, it is just to ensure that we do our job that we have chosen to do properly. Yes, it does require us to now document that to be able to prove that we've done it. And that's where the work comes in, is now to document this whole process of how do we ensure that our engagements are of good quality. But at the end of the day, if we don't document, it cannot be communicated within the firm, it cannot be evaluated to see if it worked, and it cannot be evidenced to an external party. So documentation is quite necessary. For a lot of firms, they may have implemented proper quality management procedures in the past already. You may have had responses, proper responses already, proper procedures already. Okay. ISQM 1 is not there to reinvent the wheel. It is just there to ensure that everybody is doing the same thing consistently. What do we want to achieve with ISQM 1? Ladies and gentlemen, ISQM 1 is not necessarily going to improve our audit quality overnight. It is not necessarily going to allow you to do less work during an audit. It is not necessarily going to fix everything the first time around. But the idea is to have that overall management in place to try and improve our quality. And hopefully, if we plan properly, our engagements can occur more effectively, more efficiently, and in the long term, we can start to save time. But if I use a silly example, if I train someone properly before they go into an engagement, they're going to do the right thing the first time around, which is going to save me time on reviewing, so going to save me time on fixing the errors. It's going to save me time on, back and forth between me and this employee on what they did wrong. And hopefully that can then increase the quality of my engagement but also reduce the time and effort put into that engagement. So that's the idea behind ISQM 1, and I think we do need to change our mindset. We shouldn't see it as extra work or extra responsibility. We should rather see it as a tool to manage our companies better going forward. It is part of the overall management of our business. At the end of the day, if we do this properly, our quality management system should provide us with reasonable assurance that our objectives are achieved, meaning that we have performed our engagements to the best of our ability in compliance with the standards to a good quality to enable to serve the public interest. Reasonable assurance is not absolute level of assurance. No business can say 100% that their internal control or management or planning or process that they have implemented takes away all risks. Right? No business can say that. And we also do not expect that it's going to work 100% the first time around. This quality management process is a rolling process. Every year we're going to evaluate what did we achieve? Were there any issues? What were the problems? Why did it happen? How can we fix it? And naturally, there can be inherent limitations due to human judgment, due to breakdowns in the system. We will deal with that as and when they come along. So that is our intention with ISQM 1. This is why we have ISQM 1, why we need it, why we need to implement it. Naturally, this will look different for different types of firms and different types of entities, depending on the size, depending on the amount of employees, depending on the clients. So they have changed ISQM 1 to such extent that it is very scalable. Right? If you're a large firm, you're going to have to document a lot more regarding your processes. If you're a smaller firm, there is going to be substantially less. But if I think about a sole proprietor, for instance, they don't have to communicate anything with anyone else. It's just them. They don't need to worry about employing the right people. It's just them. So there's a lot of responses and processes that's not going to be applicable to them at all. But we should still consider. So what does ISQM look like? And I'm sure you all have seen this. This is our components of ISQM 1. And this is to help us to create this management system or this system of internal control. I don't really want to use the word control since they have changed it to quality management system, but it can be compared to a normal business's internal control process, right? To ensure that things run smoothly. So we have certain elements. There are 6 elements that we want to ensure is being implemented in a firm that at the end of the day, if we implement it properly, will lead to quality engagements serving the public interest. Let's talk about these. And as I said, we're going back to, back to basics, the foundation. What do we actually want? What are we trying to achieve? First off, governance and leadership. There needs to be, in any entity, there needs to be strong ethical leadership to ensure that things happen as and how it is supposed to happen. Nothing new, nothing difficult. We just need to make sure that we assign responsibility. Someone needs to take responsibility for the management of the firm. The second one, we need to be ethical when performing our engagements, when dealing with clients. Nothing new. It is a requirement of our profession. Number 3, when we accept clients, we need to do it in a specific, proper way to ensure that we do not accept clients that we're not supposed to accept. right? We need to do a risk assessment. Do we actually want this client? Can we take on this client? Do we have the resources for this client? Number 4, we need to do our engagements in a certain way. So what should our engagement performance look like? It should be in compliance with the standards. Once again, that is a basic principle, a basic pillar of our profession. Nothing new, nothing extra. Resources. We need to make sure that we have enough resources to be able to perform our job, to provide our services. Any entity needs to plan their resources. And then lastly, we need a specific communication channels within this entity to ensure that things happen as and how it is supposed to happen. Right, those are the 6 requirements. It's quite plain and simple. It makes sense, logical sense. Right. The last 2 components then deals with how these 6 elements will then be implemented and evaluated. So we have our risk assessment process. So we need to, in order to implement this quality management system, we need to identify what are the risks that these 6 elements may not be implemented. And then we need to put responses in place to address those risks. So what could cause these 6 elements not to work, not to happen, not to be implemented, not to achieve the objectives that we want to achieve? Looking at my specific entity, and this is where the scalability comes in. Because risks will be different depending on the size of your entity, the nature of your entity, the type of engagements you perform, the type of clients you have, the type of employees you have. Naturally, if I'm dealing with listed entities, I'm going to have quite a lot more risks than a small firm who only deals with voluntary audits of very small entities. If I'm dealing with SICA trainees, SIPA trainees, tax trainees, employees who are still busy studying, employees who come from high school, my risks are going to be a lot different than a company who has had the same employees for the last 10 years and they're not employing anyone new. Their employees have already studied, they already have certain qualifications and designations. If I am using certain technological resources that is highly advanced, that's going to lead to different risks than another entity who are not using that resources. So we have to perform a process to identify the risk over the 6 elements and how we can reduce that risk. This is a new step. So in the past, in ISQC1, we only had to implement policies and procedures to ensure these 6 elements. Well, it wasn't 6 then, they added the information and communication, but be that as it may, there was no risk assessment. And that's where the scalability became a problem, because we basically had a tick list. Everybody had a checklist to say that these are the things I need to implement. I've done it, tick, 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 tick. But those processes and procedures that they've implemented may not have been applicable to that firm, may not have been enough, may have been too much. So we want to specifically tailor it for the firm. And then lastly, we have the monitoring and remediation, which is basically evaluating my processes that I've implemented to ask, did I achieve my outcome? Did I achieve what I want to achieve? And then if there is a problem, if there are any deficiencies, if there are still risks, to go and remedy that. To say, okay, great, what I did initially didn't work. Let me fix it going forward. To compare this to audit analogy, if you think about that management report that you give to a client at the end of the day, a report to indicate to them where their internal control didn't work, where it went wrong so that they can remedy that going forward to ensure maybe they lose less money or they do things more properly, they can increase their profit. This is a very, very important step, right, to ensure that we can continually increase quality. That was still there in the past, but in ISQC1, it was very limited. It was almost like a test of control approach, where, as I said, you had your list of all your responses and you say, did I implement all of these responses? Tick, 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 tick. I'm happy, done. But we didn't really ask the question, did the responses that I've implemented actually help me to achieve my objective? Or did I still have engagements that were of bad quality, that wasn't done properly? So that is the basic requirements, the elements of our quality management system. What does this look like practically? What do we need to do? So I've broken it down into 4 steps, and this is also the 4 steps that our manual is based on. Step 1, you need to establish quality objectives. So for each of these 6 components, you're going to ask yourself, what would I like to achieve? Now, the standard gives you objectives, and you have to consider the standard's objectives. So these are included in our manual as standard objectives. You can add to them, you can amend them, you can change it a little bit, but you don't want to take away from what the standard has given you. For very small firms, you may find that you only use the objectives provided by the standard. Okay. So, for example, if we think about the element of governance, one of the objectives is that leadership should take responsibility for the quality of the engagements performed by the firm, which means that leadership should take responsibility and accountability for this whole quality management system. How can we ensure that we take that accountability? Well, that's where we then start with the risk assessment and the responses. But first, we need that objective. Once we've identified all our objectives, the next step would be to identify risk for each objective. We call this a quality risk. This is any reason why an objective may not be met. Right. Management may not be held accountable for quality properly because there's no performance reviews done. Or no one holds them accountable. No one checks what they do. This is especially, I think, a risk for very small entities, sole proprietors specifically, where it's one person who's taking responsibility for everything. Who's holding that individual accountable? How are they evaluating their responses that they've implemented? Because it's very easy, if it's just me, myself, and I, to be biased and to say, well, the work I've done is correct and I'm happy with it. These risks will be evaluated based on the nature of the entity. I'm going to show you practically how we're going to do it in a moment. This is where you will have that scalability. Different entities will have different risks. The standard does not provide you with risks at all. The standard says you have to evaluate your own risks based on the nature of the entity. For each risk that you've then identified, you will plan a response over that risk. What is a response? Well, it includes policies and procedures. So, for instance, it is my policy of this firm to only implement to only employ new employees who have passed the board exam, or new employees who have passed their degree. Or if I am appointing employees who just passed matric or who's still busy studying, I will ensure that I provide them with training to ensure that they have the proper and required qualifications. So that's a policy. What are you going to do? The procedure, on the other hand, is the actual action itself. We can't just have a policy. It's easy to have a policy and say, well, I will only employ the following type of people, or I will have training, or I will plan properly, or I will complete this document. That's very easy to have a policy. The policy needs to go into action. What does that mean? We need to say who is going to do what, when, and how. This means you need to have a person who is responsible. You need to allocate it to someone. It needs to be communicated to that person. Otherwise, they're not going to do it. Right? We need to consider the timing of this process. When is it going to happen? Once a year, throughout the year, at specific times, just before an engagement, during an engagement. Then we need to make sure that it actually does happen at that time. And then how? What will the documentation of it look like to ensure that it was done? Or will it be done verbally? That's fine as well. Everything does not have to be documented. It may be a verbal process. And then step 4, at the end of the day, once we have implemented all of our policies and procedures, we've performed it. So after a year of actually implementing this, we then need to evaluate whether these policies and procedures that we've implemented actually has allowed us to meet the objectives. So we're going to do that through monitoring the system to identify any deficiencies and also evaluating the outcome. So that's your 4 steps in the quality management. So now that we know what is required from ISQM 1. Oh, and ladies and gentlemen, just quickly, the deadline for this is the 15th of December this year. This is the deadline for step 1, 2, and 3. Just quickly on that. So by 15th of December 2022, you need to have assessed your risk, you need to have identified responses, and you need to have documented your policies and procedures that you're going to implement next year. The implementation will only start on the 15th of December. You can do early implementation. You can start it now already, but implementation will only start on the 15th of December compulsory. Which means that evaluating the system will only be happening next year. Compulsory date, 15th of December 2023. So after a year of implementing, we're going to evaluate to make sure implementation was done properly. That being said, I would suggest that you try some early monitoring procedures, maybe throughout the year, so that you can pick up if there's any issues with some of these policies and procedures, and then you can already start to remedy them. Right? So maybe after 6 months, do a bit of a stand back and evaluate what have we implemented, did it work, maybe get feedback from the whole firm on their take on the quality management and these type of things. Right? But compulsory only from 15th of December 2023 for the evaluation part. So what now? Now that we know what the standard requires, in a nutshell, what do we have to do? What is my steps going forward? Some of you may have started already with some of these steps. Some of you may not have done anything yet, and that's totally fine as well if you're a small firm. Hopefully, you will still have time to do everything, right? If you're a very small firm, it's of course going to be a lot quicker and a lot easier. But these are my 10 steps. This is from me. This does not come from the standard. You don't have to follow it. This is just me trying to give some guidance. Step 1, you have to have a plan. What are you going to do to implement ISQM 1? So you have to consider who is going to take responsibility for it. Naturally, the standard requires those with the partners to take ultimate responsibility, but you can delegate it. So you can appoint a specific person in the firm who's going to run with ISQM1 and implement the whole process. You can outsource it. So you can definitely get consultants in to help. So Probeta Training doing the manual, that's part of help. Ultimax may be coming in to help you with the practical implementation, but you cannot outsource the accountability. Someone can come in to help you implement certain documents, certain processes, help you with risk assessment. But management still remains ultimately accountable. So who is going to do this? When are they going to do certain things? And what do we need to do? So if you haven't started yet, I would suggest start with a meeting. A meeting of all the partners. If it's only you and yourself, one partner, you don't need to have a meeting. You just need to go and sit and think, how are you going to do this? When will you do what? Assign responsibility to certain individuals, which is step 2. Make sure there is someone with responsibility. As a minimum, someone needs to take operational responsibility to start with the risk assessment, to start with what resources are we going to implement? What will this look like? Right. Then you can have other different responsibilities. You can have a separate person dealing with the ethical requirements. You can have a separate person dealing with resources like an HR manager or an HR partner. You can have a separate person dealing with monitoring. So you can split out the different responsibilities should you want to. It just depends on what your firm looks like. That's why it's important to have this implementation plan and say, who is going to do what? When will the rest of these steps be performed? And what is my deadline by when it should be done? Put deadlines in place so that you know at which stage do you want to be done with what. Then step 3, don't skip step 3. Go and look at the quality you've already implemented, the resources you've already implemented under the old ISQC1. Think about resources that you already have. Things like, you know what, we already have a planning for the company in terms of who's my clients for the year and how many team members I'm going to need. We already have standard training practices in place for this firm. We already have standard HR procedures in place. Because all of those procedures can probably still be used. It can help you in your risk assessment. It can help you with your responses. So identify what you already have in place. Then step 4 would be to go and sit down and do your risk assessment. This is not going to happen in one day. It may take quite long depending on the size of the firm. It may be quite quick. But you need to go and sit down and work through each component and all of the objectives. I'm going to show you. We have a document to guide you through that process and identify for your firm, with your type of engagements, with your size, with your employees, with all of the circumstances regarding your firm, what can go wrong? You don't have to finish it right away. This is an iterative process. It can be changed. It can be added to later. So maybe as you start creating responses for some of your risks, you identify new risks, and that's fine as well. It also doesn't have to be 100% right the first time. Don't worry if you miss something the first time. If you make a mistake the first time, you're going to find it when we monitor and evaluate the system later on, and then we can remedy it. As long as it's not a huge item that you've missed, that's going to lead to your engagements being of a very low quality. But anything is better than nothing at this stage. Once you've done the risk assessment, You will then, for each risk, identify a response. Now, this 2 steps can be done at the same time. As you identify a risk, already think about what response can I implement over this risk. And once again, some of your current responses may still be valid. Step 6 then, what is my action? Now I have a response, I have a policy, or I have a process that I want to put in place. Who needs to do this? When will it be done? How will it be done? How will I actually take action here? Is there a document that needs to be completed? Is there a meeting that needs to be held? Is there a specific person who needs to do something very specific? Because then we need to communicate that. We need to have the documents in place that need to be completed. We need to maybe put deadlines in place for these things to happen. So that's step 6 and step 7. What action are we now going to take? And how are we going to communicate this to that relevant individual? You don't have to, each and every time you identify a new response, run to that person and say, we've identified that you need to do A, B, C, and D. It can be as easy as, you know, having a meeting and saying, okay, in terms of our quality management system, partners, you have to do A, B, C, and D. Managers, you have to do A, B, C, and D. Team members, these are the things you need to be aware of. So it may be a good idea to finish all of this and then decide how are we going to communicate these requirements. Then after a year of implementing these steps, we're going to monitor that this process is taking place. So monitoring consists of 2 things. Number 1, we will still have our test of control approach like we had in the past. It's not null and void. You can still go and do your checklist and say, okay, when we started our ISQM journey, we said we need to implement the following procedures. We need to have independence declaration signed. We need to have proper planning. We need to have meetings on the following dates. We need to have the following type of training. We need to do this. We need to do that. Did we actually do this? So tick the boxes. Was all of this done? Was the following documents used? Was the following procedures implemented? If there's deficiencies, well then, why did it happen? Why did we not implement this process? And how are we going to fix it going forward? But then, over and above the test of control approach, we also need to ask ourselves, was our objectives met? And this cannot be done through the test of control approach. Just because a process was implemented does not mean that we met the objective at the end of the day. So we need to perform other monitoring activities to try and identify if the objectives were met. And we will look at what those are in a moment. Then step 9, once we've done the monitoring, once we've identified whether the objectives were met or not, once we have identified deficiencies and issues and gaps and discussed why it happened and what we're going to do about it, then we're going to evaluate the system and say, in the last year, did the system achieve the objectives it were supposed to achieve? If we had quite a lot of deficiencies, and we know from our engagements that maybe there were huge issues in our engagements, quality problems, and the answer is no, then so be it. Then the answer is no, and we fix it. Right. If the answer is 50-50, okay, it worked in most cases, there were some issues and problems, that's fine too. How are we going to fix it? If the answer is yes, great. There may still be small deficiencies that we need to fix. So step 10 is then basically we say for the next year, we start again at step 4. What was the deficiencies in our system? Does this indicate a new risk? Or does this indicate that our risk assessment was wrong? Or does it indicate that we need a different response or a new response? And then the process will start again. So it is a circular process. You may find in the first year that you have quite a lot of issues that needs to be addressed. You may find that there's not a lot, as long as you address them. So these are the steps that you need to follow. But now the question is, okay, I understand these steps that I need to follow. I need to do risk assessment. I need to implement responses. Those responses may be verbal discussions. It may be an actual document. It may be a new process. It may be a new system. How do I document, communicate, implement, maintain, and provide evidence that I've done this? Because this is now where the extra work comes in, right? We actually need to be able to prove that we have done this. We need to document the system, document our risk assessment, document our responses. Once again, this will depend on the nature of the firm. Not everything needs to be documented in a lot of formal detail. But ISQM does require very specific documentation. So sufficient documentation to support an understanding of everyone's roles and responsibilities. Sufficient documentation to support consistent implementation. If you do not know what your responses are, you can't implement it. You can't communicate it. You can't implement it. Okay, so at the very least, you need to document your objectives, your risks, and your responses. At the very least, even if you are just one person, a sole proprietor. Because we can't implement if we don't know what the responses are ourselves. And we then also can't provide evidence of it to anyone else. We also can't evaluate it if we didn't at least document what our response was going to be. Right, so objectives, risk, responses, and then an evaluation of these. How did we evaluate if they were implemented and if we did achieve the objectives? The documentation should then also include, just quickly on my next slide, who's responsible, and the quality objectives and risks, which we spoke about, the response to address risks, evidence of monitoring activities, evaluation of findings, deficiencies, root causes, remedial actions. Okay, so this is my evaluation of the system itself. Communications regarding monitoring and conclusions of the system. This is what the standard requires us to document. So what do we have as ProBeta training that can then help you to practically do this, and how is this going to help you? Once again, for those of you who have already purchased the product, you would know everything that makes up part of it. But what we have is we have a word manual, right? The word manual indicates the objectives from the standards, the standard policies that you can implement to address those objectives, and then some action points in terms of how to do it. You don't necessarily need a big word manual like this. I'm just going to open it up. You don't necessarily need one like this. Once again, it depends on the size of your entity. It depends on how you communicate within your entity. It depends on your policies and procedures. Okay. But now I apologize for the colors. I'm busy identifying which sections can be removed for smaller entities. So you will see I'm busy working on it myself as well for the 100th time. But just quickly, the idea with this word manual is just to have one document with all your responses in one place. So that's our starting point, is the manual itself. You will have to, and I apologize, this is going to be work. You will have to read through this manual. You will have to edit certain things for your firm specifically, okay, if you are making use of it. Right. So just quickly running through this manual. So practical implementation, where do you start? Right? Open the manual and read it. That's where you start. The first few items in this manual, the preface, you can actually ignore it. That's just a bit of a welcoming letter. You can delete it if you want to as well. The acronyms, that's just an explanation of the acronyms. Commitment by leadership, this is just to insert who is the person taking ultimate responsibility so that we can prove that management has taken ultimate responsibility for this manual. Right, then there's some network firm considerations to identify if you are part of a network firm. If you're not, you can actually delete all of this. You don't need to keep it in, or you can keep it in and at the end conclude that, no, I am not a network firm. Okay. Then we have a little bit of guidance on adapting it for smaller firms. You can delete that if you want to. And then we start with the actual manual itself, establishing a system of quality management. Okay, so we explain what a system of quality management is, exactly like I've explained to you now, the elements that is included, right? The process that needs to be followed, step 1, 2, 3, 4, as we have explained it now. Maybe zoom in a little bit. Right, and then we have the take action part. So this is the action that you need to take. The board of directors needs to take responsibility, needs to go and do a risk assessment. Here's the documents that you're going to do it on. So we tell you exactly who needs to do what and how. You can delete this part if you want to, this take action part, after you've taken the action, or you can leave it in and just change it for your firm and say the board of directors has documented the following requirements on the following documents, so that you know that it has been done. So you will see we give you the objectives. These are the objectives as per the standard that is required, right? And then we tell you exactly what you need to do to ensure that those objectives are met. These policies and procedures that we give you in here, it is standard guidance. It may not be applicable to all firms. You can change it in your firm. So this is where you will need to read through it and ask yourself, am I happy with this process in my firm, or do I need to change it? This then works together with your risk assessment, because remember we said you have to, for each objective, do a risk assessment, and then based on the risk assessment, have a policy and procedure that you're going to implement. And that policy and procedure should then be in the manual. So here is what I would suggest. Work through the manual up until page 12. Okay? That is where we've taken responsibility. So management have signed that they've taken responsibility. We understand the system of quality management. There's a few things regarding network if you're part of a network firm. So up until page 12. When it comes to part 1.2, you need to move over to the risk assessment document, because now we're actually starting to address specific objectives for each and every component within quality management. So we need to start with our risk assessment process, okay, which just quickly to show you in the manual, is part 2. Okay. So part 1.2 that I just showed you, that needs to work together with your risk assessment. So for now, I'll just leave that. We go to risk assessment process. And we explain to you exactly what the risk assessment process is, what you need to do, and we give you a very nice take action box. What is the action that you need to take? Go and complete document 2.1 and 2.2. What happens in document 2.1 and 2.2? Well, your evaluation of your firm and your risk assessment. Okay. So we're going to look at who is our firm. What's the size of our firm? What's the clients we have? What's the type of engagements we do? We need to understand all of that as we do the risk assessment. So there's that document, understanding the firm. How complex is the firm? How big is the firm? What's the management style of the firm? How many partners? Is it just a sole proprietor? What does the resources of the firm look like? Do we have 10 employees that has been working there for 10 years, or do we get new trainees in every single year? Do we have SICA and SIPA trainees? Do we have people on the ADP program with IRBA? Because all of that will lead to different risks. Right. Network. Are we part of a network? And what is the network requirements? What engagements do we perform? So consider all of that. And then, based on that information, go and do your risk assessment per component. Okay, as I said, this is the process that may take the most time and that you may need to come back to and update quite a lot. This Annexure 2.1, the risk assessment document, is probably the most important document in this whole manual. Okay, and you have to go and edit it for your firm. You cannot just use this document as is. We've provided you with guidance, but you cannot use it as is. Okay, please. We've had a few clients who registered with IRBA now in the last few months with our quality manual. And IRBA's feedback every single time is Annexure 2.1 has not been modified for the firm. You cannot just submit it as is. This is your risk assessment. It's going to be different for each and every firm. So what did we do in this document to help you with guidance? We've given the quality objective. This must be documented. Then we have given you examples of risks. Ladies and gentlemen, these are just examples. They may not be applicable to your firm. You may need to add to it. You may need to change it. You may need to amend it. But we've tried to give you as much as possible, right? You will see for every single objective, we've given actually a few risks. I think in one cell, there is more than one. Here we have 3 risks in one cell. So what you can do if you want to, is you can split them out into different rows in the Excel so that you can address each one individually. Okay. And then you will see there's a column that says assessment of risk. Evaluate the nature and circumstances of the entity to identify if this risk is applicable. This now depends on your firm's circumstances as per document 2.2 that we just looked at. Okay. So you can now go and say, I am a small firm with only 10 employees that have worked here for 10 years. I know they are all competent, so I don't really have a risk or a problem with my resources in terms of competencies. I'm happy. I don't get in new people every single year that needs to be trained from scratch. Or you can go and indicate that you are a revolving door for new trainees and new people. So definitely there's always that risk of, do they have the right qualifications? Do they have the right experience? Should I perhaps provide training? Once again, we've given some examples and explanations there. So certain things we have indicated that this will always be a risk. Right. Certain things we've indicated for a large firm, it will be a risk because of the following. For a small firm, it will be a risk because of the following. But once again, these are just examples, and you need to go and do your own risk assessment. Now, ladies and gentlemen, this risk assessment may require you to go and talk to the rest of your firm. It may require you to get input from your teams, from employees, from managers, from other partners. This may not be a process that you can just sit and do by yourself, depending on the nature of your firm. So we've also given some guidance in where you may need to communicate with the rest of the firm to be able to do the risk assessment properly. Right. Once you've then done that, you will have to indicate, is this risk applicable? So you're going to say, is there a risk that's likely to happen? Yes or no? What will be the effect? Will there be an adverse effect? Yes or no? And then is this risk applicable to you as a firm? The standard says you can evaluate these risks as low, medium, high if you want to. You don't have to. So in our template, we've just put a yes or a no. But by all means, if you want to go and rank them low, medium, high, you're more than welcome to do so. Basically, what we're saying is if the risk is applicable, you need a response. If the risk is not applicable, you don't need a response. And then we've also indicated the responses as per our manual. So as we've talked about, those policies and procedures that we've included in the manual, that is also in this document. So this responses links back to the manual for each and every component. If you want to change the responses, you're more than welcome to do so. You have to do so for your firm. It's very specific to your firm. But remember that you're going to change it here and you're going to change it in your manual. The two needs to talk to one another. Okay, so at this stage, what we've done, just going back to the manual, like I've shown you, right? We have given the objective. There is the objectives that is in my Excel document as well. We haven't put the risks in the manual. So the manual will only have your objectives and your responses to achieve those objectives. The risk is in the Excel. Okay, so we have the objective and then the responses. And these responses should then agree with what is in the Excel. And then we also have the little take action blocks, which says who needs to do what and how. And this will also then respond to the Excel. So the Excel document is basically your work in progress, where you do the risk assessment, where you identify what you think you need to implement to deal with that risk. And then the manual is your outcome of that. Now that I know what the risk is, now that I've thought about my response, let's now properly document it in the manual. How are we going to do this going forward? So the risk assessment document can be very informal. It doesn't have to, you don't have to document everything 100% properly there. This is more like your brainstorming session. And the manual is then your proper outcome. You do not need both. If you are a small firm and you only want to use the risk assessment document, that's fine too. We actually do sell it separately. Right? Because the risk assessment document at the end of the day does document everything the standard requires. It has your objective, your risk, and your response. Right? But then naturally, your risk assessment document will be your whole quality management system, and you will have to document it a bit more formally and complete, if that makes sense. Right. So just to reiterate that, for each and every component, maybe just to show you the next one, governance and leadership, we have the objective, right? We have the policy that needs to be implemented to achieve that objective. You will have to read through this. You will have to decide if you're happy with it. And then we have the take action, which is how are you going to implement this? And that will respond back to the risk assessment document. So there you will see my response, and there you will see my firm implementation. So this firm implementation is basically that take action. How did you take action? How did you ensure that this happened? Was it a verbal process? Was it a documented process? And where is proof of that documentation? And then as part of the manual, we have then also provided standard documents to prove this implementation. So for instance, if you say that you had, maybe just go to governance and leadership, if you specifically evaluated the person responsible for quality control, we've evaluated them to ensure they have the time and the qualifications to perform this. Where is that evaluation? So then we've given you an example of how you can document that. These annexures are just that, example documentation. You don't have to use them. You can change them. You can have your own documents that replace them, as long as you can prove at the end of the day that you've implemented these responses. Right. If it is more informal, just to quickly show you the difference between more formal and more informal, think about the evaluation of the persons responsible for quality control. If you're a large firm with a lot of partners and you assign responsibility to specific people, then I would suggest you go and complete this document to say, I've assigned responsibility of the following section to person A because I believe he is competent for the following reasons. If you're a very small firm, though, you can do this during a meeting, during a board meeting, and say, we decide that person A will be responsible. We believe that he's competent for the following reasons. And then your proof will be your minutes of meetings. And then you don't have to complete that document. For a sole proprietor, you also don't have to go and complete that document. You know you are competent because it is you. You're the only person. Who else is going to do it? But you're the partner, you're the owner. You know you are competent. You don't have to complete Annexure 3.2. Maybe you can just document in the Excel under firm implementation, I am the only partner, I am the owner, I'm taking responsibility for this. I have so many years of experience. I've been to ISQM training sessions. I know what I'm doing. I'm happy that I am competent. And that's it. No extra document. Right. So how you implement this will very much be dependent on the type of entity you are. We have provided you with all of those extra annexures, though, as examples to help you, but you don't have to use all of them. Once again, for a very small firm, if you just have the risk assessment document and you indicate sole proprietor, how you've ensured these things happen, that is enough. Right, so that's for step 1, 2, and 3. Identifying the objective, doing the risk assessment, and having a response. Then step 4, when it comes to the evaluation, monitoring the system. Like I've indicated, two-step approach, test of control, and then other monitoring activities. For the test of control in the Excel document, we've added a little column there to say test of control. Literally for each response that you have said I'm going to implement, at the end of the year, just do a checklist. Did I do this? Yes or no? If I did, tick, great, I'm happy it was performed. If I didn't perform it and the answer is no, then I have to evaluate why not, what was the impact, could this have led to a deficiency? Right. Then for the other monitoring activities. So we still have to evaluate whether or not our objectives have been met. Right. So that will be after all of the components. So we have a section for each component within the manual: ethical requirements, acceptance of clients, resources, engagement performance, and they all follow the same process: objectives, responses. Right. Then at the end, we have monitoring. Now for monitoring, okay, who's responsible for it? All those nice things. And then what will be your monitoring activities? So in the manual, we've indicated what activities do you need to perform to identify whether or not the objectives have been met. This is not a test of control approach. This is actually to get evidence on the outcomes of my engagements. Remember, our objective is to perform the engagement to a certain quality in the public interest. So did I reach that objective? How am I going to identify it? Well, from evaluating results from external inspections. Maybe reports received from service providers, especially things like engagement quality reviewers and those type of things. Inspection findings communicated by IRBA. That could be an indication. I know they're not necessarily inspecting your firm, but what was the outcomes on all the other firms? And are the same issues in my firm? Reviews of employees, reviews of your engagements, we are adding to this list. So please just note, for those of you who have already bought the manual, we will be giving out a list of more monitoring activities that you can go and add there. But we also then have an annexure specifically for that. Monitoring activities. Okay. So the idea is to then go and perform these monitoring activities. Communication from regulatory bodies for whom you perform engagements. That can also be a monitoring activity to identify possible breaches of quality. Reviews of engagement files, internal partner reviews, performance reviews, output reviews from employees. You can do a questionnaire to see what the employees thought of quality during the year, of how engagements were performed. Okay. So from each of these, you then have to ask yourself, what was the outcome? Did I identify specific deficiencies? Was it brought to my attention that things happened during an engagement that was not supposed to happen? And then if you identify a deficiency, that needs to be evaluated to identify which objective does it impact. So for that purposes, we go back to the risk assessment document. That is why I said the risk assessment document, the most important document. Okay, so let's say I've identified a deficiency. Maybe employees have brought to my attention that there has been ethical issues in the past that was not dealt with properly for whatever reason. Right, where is that? I'm just quickly going to find it. Report breaches. Okay, so there has been breaches that hasn't been reported. So I go and identify my objective that is applicable. And I have responses in place for that. There are responses to say if there is a breach, we must report it, and this is the process to be followed, but it didn't happen. And I'm going to document that. I'm going to say breach in ethical requirements were not responded to. Why not? So that's then the rest of the process. Why did this happen? What was the root cause? And how am I going to fix this going forward? What is my remedial action? How am I going to remedy this? And then based on all of these deficiencies that you've identified, an evaluation of these deficiencies, you can then go and evaluate the overall system and say, okay, looking at it, we've had some deficiencies, but you know what? They were not too bad. They were not too big. It didn't lead to an actual engagement being of low quality. So we are happy that the system worked. Or maybe you had quite a lot of deficiencies which were quite severe and quite pervasive. then you're going to say, something is wrong in my system. Let's look at my responses. Where should I fix and change them? Okay. And then at the end of the day, we will have a report to say, based on all of these findings, this is our evaluation of the system of quality management. Once again, for small firms, especially sole proprietor, you're not going to have all of these reports necessarily, right? Because it's just you. There's not other people doing these things. So you can then use the Excel document to go and evaluate it at the end of the day and document and say, based on these deficiencies found and based on the evaluation thereof, we believe the system works or it doesn't work. Right. So just for scalability purposes, I think it's clear to see for smaller firms, you may do things a little bit differently. But whether you're a small firm, whether you're a large firm, really this document, Annexure 2.1, that's your central document. That's the most important one. Okay. So just to then summarize, what is now required of you? What should you do? Take the manual, start, as I said, from the top. Read through it, work through it, change where you think it needs to change. When you get to the risk assessment part 2, right, we switch over to that Excel. Then we do the risk assessment for all the other components. And then once you're done with the risk assessment for all the other components, you're happy with the responses, come back and mirror those responses in your Excel with the responses in the Word document for each component, for each section. You're going to have to read through it and make sure what the manual says is the same as what your Excel says. Or if you want to throw the manual out and just use the Excel, you're more than welcome to do that if that works for you. Right. You will do that for all the components up until section 7 in the manual. 226, 7, 6, 7, 7. Where's my 7? Okay, which is engagement performance, because section 8 in the manual is monitoring. That will only be applicable from next year. But please still go and read through the monitoring section in the manual to make sure that you're happy with the requirements within it in terms of your specific firm, what your firm specifically will do for monitoring purposes. You may want to change it a little bit, especially with regards to the monitoring activities and so on. If you're not part of a network, take out the network requirements. So you will see there are certain sections where you have to say, this is the person who's going to do it. This is how regularly we're going to do it. This is the type of engagement where we're going to do certain monitoring activities. You may want to change that in your firm. It may not be applicable to your firm. Right. But then only from next year onwards do you actually have to go and do the monitoring, which will then be performed on document 8.1, monitoring activities, and the risk assessment document itself. Right. And that is the quality management. Okay. Part 9 in the manual is the code of ethics. You can delete that in its entirety if you don't want it, or you can keep it in. It is basically how you ensure in the firm that you comply with the code of conduct, the IRBA code or the ISQM code, whichever code is applicable to you. If you want to keep it in, please, once again, you will have to go and read through it and take out the things that are not applicable. You will see there's certain things that needs to be edited. Okay. So this is basically just in the firm, how are we going to ensure that we comply with ethical requirements? Right. So ladies and gentlemen, that is the product, and that is how it can then help you to practically implement. And that then brings us to the end of the session, and I will be taking questions now. So if there is anyone who would like to ask questions, please do so. I see there are already a few. First question, do you still need to implement ISQM1 if you already have a system of quality control based on the old ISQC1? Yes. So the big difference from ISQC1 over to ISQM1 is this risk assessment. This risk assessment was not in ISQM1. ISQC1, I apologize. So you still have to go and do this risk assessment. What you will find is that a lot of your policies and procedures that you have under ISQC1 can just slot into the responses for ISQM1, but you will still have to go and do it. Right. So you have to have that objectives, the risk assessment, the responses. That process was not in ISQC1. And rather than trying to go and take your ISQC manual and try and change it for ISQM1, I can promise you that's going to be a whole process altogether. It may just be a good idea to just start from scratch with the risk assessment and just slot in your current responses where they fit. The next question, Caseware. Yes, Caseware is working on a cloud-based ISQC manual. What that will look like, I don't know. How much it will cost, I don't know. So we are not part of the Caseware team doing that. So if you are waiting for that, by all means, naturally their product will also be based on the standard. So I'm sure it will be compliant and all of that. And if you are using Caseware, I'm not 100% sure how it's going to interact with your Caseware audit file, though. As I said, I'm not part of that at all. But yeah, if you are waiting for that, that's fine as well. So yes, they are doing a product on their side. Right, and then just with regards to some of our annexures, yes, ladies and gentlemen, the annexures on the hub, we are still busy uploading some of them. To be honest, this ISQM has also been quite a journey for me in terms of trying to make sure that one has everything that needs to be in these templates. So I know there are still a few templates outstanding. It shouldn't be the end of the world, though. For those of you who are busy trying to get a new firm registered with IRBA, I know that we have had some feedback from IRBA as well, and we have finalized all the annexures that they are specifically looking for. So those are all loaded. But if you get specific feedback from IRBA and you need help, please let me know. I do not mind to help you. Right. But with regards to the annexures that I know some of the big things that are still outstanding are like template letters, withdrawal letters, and those type of things. So yes, we are busy getting that finalized and loading it. I have had a few clients who emailed me for specific things that they were looking for, busy communicating with them regarding that. So if there's anything urgent, please do let me know. Right. At the end of the day, you don't need all of those annexures right now. If there is something that you need urgently, let me know. I will try and help you as soon as possible. The most important thing for now is this risk assessment document. Right. Don't do the risk assessment first and see if you actually need the annexure before you worry about the annexure. Right. Let's see other questions. So that, yeah, all of the annexures will be uploaded. Don't worry, you don't have to buy it separately. We are busy uploading it. Okay, it's not a separate product. It is going to be uploaded. Okay, and then I saw someone ask to just explain the test of control approach again on the risk assessment document. So I'm calling it a test of control approach. You can really call it whatever you want, to be honest, right? But basically what it is just a checklist, right? A monitoring checklist to go through each and every response that I have implemented and say, was this done, yes or no? Right. So for example, I have, maybe if I go to, where's my training requirements? Just zoom in a little bit. Human resources. Oh my goodness, where's my response regarding training? Or is it under engagement performance? Ah, there we go. Okay, so you may have a response that says, we will train all employees on the applicable laws and regulations. Maybe you have a plan in place to say, SAPA trainees needs to do the following training. SICA trainees needs to do the following training. Other employees needs to do the following training. A test of control approach would literally just be to say, was this done? My response says, do training. Did I do training? Yes, tick. My response says, complete the following document to accept a client. Did I do it? Yes. So maybe you can select a sample of engagements and check if certain documentations were used, if certain processes were implemented. Right. So that's the test of control approach. Just literally to say, my response is the following. Was it actually done? If it's an overall response, was that overall response implemented? If it's a per engagement, maybe select a few engagements and just quickly check if it was done. Right, so that's the test of control approach that I talked about. Right. Okay, then the other questions, recording. A recording will be made available to everyone. We will email you with regards to how to access the recording, but maybe just to quickly show you, it is on our Akanani platform. For those of you who have never been on our platform, you can just Google Akanani training, right? Or if you've been there, you have a profile, you know how to get there. The lesson is not loaded yet, but once it is, we just need to edit the recording and upload it. You can just go and search for ISQM, right? It will pop up, a free one. This implementation training session is our 4-hour training session. So the free one will pop up. You can add it to your cart, and then you will have access to the recording, the slides, as well as the post assessment. Yeah. Right. And then with regards to the product itself, for those of you who have not purchased it yet and would like to know where it is, if you go to our website, under our practice management hub. So on our Probita website, you will see there's a practice management hub button. Right, that takes you to the hubs itself. You will just have to scroll for the ISQM one. So we have there's the ISQM1 risk assessment. If you only want the risk assessment document, that big Excel document that we've looked at, 862 Rand, there it is, you can purchase it. If you want the whole, I skipped it now. If you want the whole manual with everything included, there it is, ISQM 1, 2, and ISA 220 policies and procedures toolkit. Okay, there it is. And then we also have the option, if you are making use of some of our other manuals, HR manual, training and CPD manual, we have a complete hub with all of them in. The HR manual, the POPI manual, the PIA manual, the training office policies for 7,600. So it will be cheaper than if you're purchasing all of these separately, because each of them I think is 2,000, 2, 4, 6, 8. It will get you to 10. So there is a bit of discount, right? If you are using all of these manuals. So those are the different options on our hub. I think I'm just going to share this link in the chat box so that it's easier to access it. Right. Okay, and then the last question, test of control. I just realized. So yes, as I said, we are still busy as we get feedback and as we work with SciCon, as I work through the quality standard again, we are still busy making some updates to some of the documents. So the test of control tab, I do think it was a late addition, and I do not believe I have uploaded this one yet to the hub. So we will, each time there is an addition to a document, a change to a document, and we're happy with it and it's finalized, we will upload it to the hub and we will send a notification to keep you in the loop. So it's literally just an extra column if you want to add it yourself, but I am going to, I actually see that I haven't added it for all of the components yet. So I haven't even completed that one yet. I will, once it is done, we will upload it and say there is a new version. This is the specific change, right? We've added this column or whatever the case may be. I understand, especially with a risk document, you may have already started with your risk assessments. So it may be an issue to try and edit the document later on. So actually, the idea is not to change the risk assessment document. So I do believe this was the only change I've made after the fact. But as I said, you can literally add it in yourself. It is just a column. Right? So literally go and say control plus test of control, and there you have it. Right? That's all it was, just adding that column in. You don't have to do it in the Excel document, this little checkbox approach. You can do it in a separate document if you want to. It's just for me, when I was looking at it, it made more sense to do it in the Excel. Yeah. Right, any other questions? Please do let me know. And then, ladies and gentlemen, as you are using this product in future, if there's anything you think doesn't work, anything you think needs to change, anything you think needs to be added, please do let us know. We don't know all the circumstances of all our clients. So there may be things that we did not think about, that we did not include. And because the whole risk assessment thing is so brand new, I think it is a learning curve for all of us. So please share your thoughts, your feedback, issues that you've had, problems that you've had, so that we can improve the product as well on our side to make it easier for the firms. Right. Ladies and gentlemen, that is then the end. I'm not seeing any other questions. If you do still have questions, you're more than welcome to ask. Right, if there's no questions in the next 2-3 minutes, I will be closing the session. Thank you very much for your time and enjoy the rest of your day.